programming for the year, and I began to think, well, gee, I know some things that maybe other people don't know. I've been around a while, so it kind of came to my mind that I could put together a presentation and enlighten you on some of the things that maybe some people have forgotten and some things that you never heard of. So, of course, the lead-in to get you here was Chicken Farmer Rock, but that's not the beginning of the program, that's the very end one. So you don't leave. Okay, so the next one, Blood Mountain, Newbury. How did Blood Mountain get its name? And here I'm going to go to my cards because I can't remember everything. So I have to go to the cards.
I have no idea.
But was it the 1949 AT-6 plane crash in Newbury? Now an AT-6 was a trainer that they used to train pilots. It had the pilot and the trainee sitting in the front, and they had dual controls, and you learned how to fly a plane. Well, this young fellow, his parents bought him as a gift a surplus AT-6 trainer. And at the time of the crash, he was 18 years old. He had 13,000 flight hours. I mean, I've heard of people, 30 years old bragging about they've got 10,000 flight hours. He had supposedly 13 hours in. He was a champion trap shooter. Supposedly the shotgun was with him in the plane. And so it was on November 20th, 1949. It was flown by 18-year-old John Moses, and he crashed on Blood Mountain. Now, where the crash is about 75 or 100 yards away from the town line, Newbury and Goshen. It's way up in nowhere. If you get to the peak of that mountain, you can look north and you see north and south peak of the ski area. And that's about 3/4 of a mile away. So, he was a Harvard freshman and was returning to Boston after a football game in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Yale and Harvard were playing football. He was an expert pilot, so he was headed back to Boston, and he lost his way in a storm. And although he had deployed his parachute, it didn't fully open, and he died at the scene. The interesting thing was a classmate from Venezuela named Gaston Palacios was going to fly back with him, but he said, "No, I got to study, so I'm going to take the train." So he wasn't on the flight. So it's quite a hike up there. It's an interesting climb. Everything is there. As you know, it's against the law to take anything from something like this. What's the next slide? And somebody, William A. Murgatroyd, now Murgatroyd, that name is familiar to me. That was a person that lived in Goshen. I remember that name when I was a little kid. He left a plaque up there memorializing this. And so if you climb up there, it's an interesting little climb. You find
So the wreckage is still there?
it's all there. You can't remove it. You can touch it, I guess, but it's against the law to remove something like that from an accident scene. So it's kind of a memorial to this fellow, I guess you'd have to call it. So the next slide. And that's some of the wreckage. What's the next one? The rock bass. How many know about the rock bass? Okay. How did they get in Lake Sunapee? I'm going to tell you. When I had my tackle shop, I had a customer from Charlestown. and he used to come in and buy what was called an English bait hook. Had a special little hook in it, and it would catch fish a lot easier. You know, if they bit, you could really set the hook a lot easier. So he came in to buy these hooks. And one day he came in and he said, you know, I use these in Lake Sunapee. He said, for catching salmon. And he said, what I do is I go into the Connecticut River, and you know where the bridge is, he says, where you cross from Charlestown into Vermont. He said, that's the Chester Bridge, I believe. You used to have to pay a nickel toll to go across it. He says, I set a shiner trap, and I catch the rock bass, little ones. He says, I keep them live, I go fishing, and where I get out where I'm ready to fish, I dump them live overboard, and they act as live chum. He did that in Sunapee, and he did it in Pleasant Lake. And that's how they got into Lake Sunapee. I didn't get his name or anything. I didn't report it. I mean, it was just, you know, at the time I said, oh, wow. And I didn't realize the danger of the rock bass. They're a member of the sunfish family. They have very vivid red eyes. If anyone goes in the water, you know they instantly come right up to you like, what are you? And so some people get pretty scared by the little critters. The problem is they diminish the native population. They compete, they eat the eggs, they eat the food. They're very aggressive fish, and so they really cause a lot of problems in the lake. But that's how they got into Lake Sunapee. See, I only one knew that. Now you do.
Around what year was he dumping them?
Honestly, I would say in the 1980s.
So it's been that recent that it's become a problem.
Yeah. So the next slide, the Sunapee golden trout. This was an amazing fish. They only grew about 12 inches. I've heard rumors they got as big as 16 inches. They were also known as the blueback or Quebec red trout. It's a distinct strain of the Arctic char and became isolated when the glaciers receded 8,000 years ago. There are still 2 lakes in Idaho that have some of this fish population. As it happened, the state of New Hampshire traded fish eggs with Idaho. They put them into a couple of their ponds, and supposedly they're still there. The other problem was the introduction of lake trout. The golden trout interbred with the lake trout, and the exact strain of the lake trout faded away into more lake trout. And how they got in, I've heard 2 stories. One, Fish and Game purposely put the lake trout in. The second one was they were coming through with a tank of lake trout destined for Winnipesaukee or somewhere else. The fish started to turn over. They scratched their head and say, what are we going to do? Well, let's throw them in Sunapee. So that's what happened. So they're still in Sawtooth and Lake Alice in Idaho. And for several years, Fish and Game claimed that they still had a viable population in Tewksbury Pond in New Hampshire. I don't know if that's true or not. Okay, so the next one is what caused the floating island? I got a little pointed here. The floating islands occurred on Lake Todd. Is that going to show?
It doesn't show.
It may not show.
Not on the
Well,
LCD.
that red circle in that area. If you look at this is a map of Lake Todd as it exists today. And you see that cut in the middle there? That is where originally the railroad went through. But when the state in 1966 built a new road. They built it north of the railroad track, and they filled in a large part of where the floating islands were. And by meaning a floating island, what happens is in the fall, after the summer, gases build up under a mat, and this mat then builds up gas, floats up, and remains there for a while. Now, in the 1960s, I went out there with my cousin. We rode out and rode up to ones when they had come up. I poked an oar into the island on the side. It belched gas and sank. So the original lake was this little thing here where you see it's sort of looks like a banana. That was the original lake when they did the land grant deeds and established the property rights for there. And it was about, depending on who you read, 12 acres more or less, or 18 acres more or less. But on each end of it was like swamp, or marsh, or bog, if you will. Now, if you go into a swamp where there's a bog, you can actually walk on it, and it's like walking on a give and take cushion, you can do it. And that's what this was. And apparently gases build up, and they still occurred as late as, about 4 years ago, I think they came up. Most of what was there was filled in when the state did that big cut between Newbury and Bradford as you cross the town line. All that rock went in there to fill. They filled in an awful lot of what was there. So we kind of lost some of the floating islands. I had a theory. What's the next slide? Here's an interesting one. This is a train, and this is a 440 train. There's 9 or 10 cars being pulled by that train. Actually, there's 2 of them. And each car carries about 60 passengers, and this was destined for Lake Sunapee, carrying passengers to disseminate into all of the, at that time, 5 or more hotels. The railroad crossing, go back to the pond. The railroad crossing you saw was actually right here. Andrew Brook came down on this side. When the state built the new road, they changed it over to the other side. So, what do I have here? Lake Todd was originally Toad Pond and was a natural pond 18 acres before the dam was installed. These islands appear in random years in the fall to a buildup of the gas. The pond location, if you look at the upper end, way that finger way up at the end, the Fowler brothers had a sawmill, and that's all gone now. The partial part of the dam is still there, but they had it almost built right over the water. And you go up there and look, you can't find a sawdust pile. So my theory is the sawdust came down, they let it go into the lake, came down, got to this crossing, but swirled around in this area and covered over that mat with sawdust and kind of acted like a seal. This is my theory. Maybe crazy about it, but it filled that up so that gas would collect and not escape, and periodically it would build up enough to lift it. So, that's my story on that, and I'm sticking to it. The next slide.
Who was Todd?
Hmm?
Who was Todd?
Actually, Lake Todd was originally called Toad Pond. Back to the pond. That little thing there was called Toad Pond. The road that went up by it, which is now called Gillingham Drive, was called Frog Street. And I remember that when I was a kid, it was called Frog Street.
When did they dam the lake? In the 1800s?
I have that here somewhere.
When you get to it?
Well, let's get into it. Governor John Wentworth was a loyalist to the King of England. He was in charge of surveying the land encompassing Newbury and selling the land rights to settlers coming from other areas in New England. Wentworth was a loyalist. He was loyal to the king. He did not like what was going on with the revolution. He assigned his brother-in-law, John Fisher, to disperse all of the properties in Newbury, to basically propagate and populate the land. And you had to promise to grow crops, and there was a whole thing you had to agree upon to get that land. Well, John Fisher didn't quite trust his brother-in-law, and so he gave the power of attorney to disseminate all these properties to John Pierce. And so I brought along a map at the end. You can look at this. This is an 1803 map of Fisher's Field. And on there you'll see a lot of properties that are still under the name of John Pierce. He hadn't dispersed all of them at that point. So that's kind of an interesting thing in regard to the land rights. And so to secure his interest, he conveyed to John Pierce on November 7th, 1775. It wasn't recorded until May 18th, 1781. Pierce conveyed to James Gregg, a New Boston millwright, and his name is on this map, Lot 24 of Fisher Field, dated February 9, 1792, and recorded this on September 4th, 1792, in the Hillsborough County Record of Deeds. Now, Hillsborough County, everything old you want to find out about Fisher's Field and Newbury, you have to go to the Hillsborough County, because Merrimack County didn't exist at this point. So he sold flowage rights to a said James Gregg, as well as flowage rights to any other lots affected by a dam. James Gregg conveyed by a deed dated July 1, 1795, the same land and water rights to this John Gregg, and recorded it on July 27, 1796. And I'm assuming that a dam and subsequent buildings were erected, as an early road map dated October 24th, 1793 indicates the existence of a Gregg's Mill. Now, if you go to Bradford, that mill building is still there. It's the brick building by the dam. So something had to have been done to block up the pond as early as that. It isn't and probably wasn't the structure that's there now, but it certainly is an interesting little bit of history. Next slide. Here is a picture of Fowler Mill, and as you can see, they're pretty much right over the water. And there's an interesting thing that this photo shows. Does anyone pick it up? Today, New Hampshire is 83% forested. Back then, we were almost 90%. fields. The top of Mount Sunapee grazed sheep. All of the trees in New Hampshire are second growth, with the exception of a very few areas. The Bradford pines are one. The only thing that saved them was when Davis and Simons came through and cut down all the trees in that area. They looked at those and said, these are all hollow and rotten on the inside. We'll give them to the state. And that's how we got it. That's why.
Is that Mount Sunapee we're seeing in the top of the photograph?
Huh?
Is that Mount Sunapee we're seeing at the top of the photograph?
No, you're looking at over towards Gillingham Drive. Where that would now be Bill Weiler's land, I think. Well, no, I don't know. It actually, as I look at it, I think that's Morse Hill in the background, and you're standing on what was Bill Weiler's land and looking that way, as a guess. But they were right on the brook.
Is that why we have so many stone walls?
The stone walls were to hold the sheep in. We did not raise cattle. We raised sheep. A guy in Vermont brought over a bunch of merino sheep from Spain, and from that little population, the entire Northeast was into the deal of growing sheep for wool, merino wool. In fact, that was one of the issues with the Civil War. We were wool, the South was cotton. And this house still exists. That's where Alex Azzotti lives. And I had that on here for just a simple little thing. That's a double house. The Fowler brothers lived in that house. And from what it looks like, one brother lived on one end and the other brother lived on the other end, because it's like a double house. Here again, that's my opinion. But I did go in the house and it looked that way.
Where is that?
That's in South Newbury, almost to the Bradford line. When you're coming down, just past the upper turnoff to Morse Hill, the next house you come to on the left, that's that double house. It sits back. Next slide. So the steamboats. So with the arrival of trains to Lake Sunapee, and with them the thousands of tourists to the grand hotels, there needed to be a means to deliver those guests to the hotels. And so the Woodson brothers, Frank, Daniel, and Elias, arrived here from Maine to do tree cutting. There are pictures that you can see where Draper Corporation in later years, the parking lot for Lake Sunapee was a lumber yard. And they used to take all the trees off, mill them, and pile up the lumber and then haul it off. In the old days, they had portable mills, and because of the difficulty in transport, they used to almost always cut the lumber on site. Morse Hill has in the back of Gene Whitman's house, there was a shed and an old mill yard there, and they would cut the trees, mill them up, and then take out the finished lumber. So Draper was doing that right in the parking lot. They arrived to cut trees, but saw a need for transporting people around the lake. From that came a total of 5 steamboats. The next slide. Over the years, as well, they built 3 lighthouses for nighttime navigation. Those lighthouses are still here. There are 3 of only 5 in New Hampshire. The other 2 are on the coast. So that's a pretty amazing thing. The first boat to travel around the lake was an 1854 horse-powered boat. In 1859, Austin Goings launched a boat called the Surprise, and in 1876, N.S. Gardner launched the side-wheeler Pennacook, and it was later renamed the Mountain Maid by Nathan Young when he bought it. Grand Leadon had a launch called Gray Court, and John Hay had his own called the Nomad. So, in 1876, the Woodson brothers launched the Lady Woodson. Is that the next slide? This is the Woodson brothers. That's Daniel, second in from the left. Frank, and Daniel is second in from the right. I don't know if Elias is in the picture. They don't name him. This gets interesting as I get along here. It was, the Lady Woodson was 50 feet long, 75 passengers. It blew up and killed Elias Woodson.
Oh.
And shortly after that, they invented the steam valve. You know, when somebody gets agitated and you say, man, why don't you blow off a little steam? Well, that's where that saying came from. When the pressure vessel got too hot, too high, it would blow off steam instead of blowing up. Although sometimes they still did, because the gauges weren't always accurate and correct. And when a locomotive blew up, it spewed all of the rods that the water ran through out the front, and it looked like it spewed a bunch of spaghetti out the front of the locomotive. So it was rebuilt, and with a second deck. The Armenia White, let's see if that's up there.
The previous one.
Well, this, look back, leave that one.
It's the one on the right.
Go to the next one. This shows the landing or the station at the lake station. Originally, they disembarked in Newbury, where the docks are, but they built a whole new thing here. And this was called Lake Station. It burned once or twice, and it was able to handle a great number of passengers. Down here was the coal bins to feed the boats. They powered them by burning coal. They'd burn most of them burned about a ton of coal a day. So one of the interesting things about this is that there was a turntable here.
Oh, wow.
And there was also a turntable in Bradford. Now, why did they need a turntable? Well, if you remember that picture of going across the lake, there were 2 locomotives. One didn't do the job. They had to have 2. So once they got up to Newbury, now we're talking about a 3% grade. 3% grade is really steep for a train. So once they got up to Newbury, now what do we do with this extra locomotive? We don't need it to go to Newport. They would put it on the turntable, turn it around, and go back. Why didn't they just back up?
They towed the locomotive with the train going back south?
All the cars would be out.
They couldn't see where they were going. Because you had the coal tender on the back, that blocked their vision, so they had to turn around so they could either look out this end or that end to see where they were going. So hence we had a turntable. Newport, another railroad before the C&C was combined, another railroad came from Claremont to Mount Sunapee, and they had a turntable there for the same reason. And that turntable is still there. The remnants of the one at Davis Cabins is still there. So that's just kind of an interesting thing. When you think of it, railroads, if you wanted to go anywhere, you had to travel by train. Because if you were going to go somewhere and you didn't have a train, what means of travel did you have? Horse or walk. And so that meant that in these colonial times, about every 20 odd miles, there was a tavern, like Silly Tavern, where you could board your horse, get a meal, get a night's sleep, and then head out for maybe 20 hours or 20 miles, 25 miles of travel that day on a horse. along comes the train, and now you can go from here to New York City in less than a day. It was amazing. The trains really changed history.
Is that railroad station building still in the same place?
The railroad station is gone. You can see remnants, stone walls and things like that were part of it, but that's all gone and grown up.
Is that where the caboose is now?
No,
No.
the caboose is actually south of that. You gotta go up onto the next road off.
So is that point where Davis Cabins is?
Yes, Davis Cabins is that's exactly where they are, right there.
Is it, Dickie, where Lake Station Realty is that where that is?
No, it's where Davis Cabins, it's down on the water.
Okay.
So, that was the first steamboat. The second was the Armenia White. It was built in 1887, cost $17,000. It was 101 feet long and carried 600 passengers and had a 7-man crew. It was retired in 1917 and sold in 1939 for $100. The third one was the Kearsarge in 1897 to 1932. That one carried 250 passengers, sold to Benmere Inn, and then Davis Cabins. What's the next slide? Oh, no.
That didn't look like water.
So, in 1939, Davis Cabins scrapped it. The pilot house of that boat is now in the Sunapee Historical Society. The Weetamoo was launched in 1992 to 1926, 54 feet long, 100 passengers, and was purposely sunk off Pine Cliff. The Ascutney, 1903 to the 1920s, was 60 feet, transformed into a workboat, and now I'm told that's a dive site. Judy isn't here, but she could verify that, I guess. Competitor on the lake was the Edmund Burke. That was built in 1885, 87 feet, double deck, 650 passengers. Later sold to George Blodgett, who renamed it the Winona. It caught fire on July 4th, 1908, and burned to the waterline in Blodgett's and sank. So,
If those boats hauled 600 people, would that only be one trip a week with that number of people?
No.
possibly. I don't know the exact details. All of these hotels had a number of amenities. They almost all had a golf course. Burke, I think it was, one of them had horseback riding, tennis courts, whatever, all kinds of different activities for people to do, as well as they had the launches going out on the lake.
I've got a poster that has the steamship. They took people to church, and so they had where the stops are, what the times were that they were going to deliver them to the churches around.
Yeah.
If
So,
If you get on the Sunapee Historical Society website, there's a 12-minute YouTube presentation on the boats and the railroad.
Oh, thank you.
that's interesting to note. They have several presentations on YouTube that are quite interesting. In fact, I pulled some of the information from those videos. So, who was Armenia White? One of the boats was named Armenia White. She was an American suffragist, philanthropist, and social reformer. Her husband, Nathaniel, was from Lancaster, and he was a stagecoach driver. And he eventually formed his own company and became a stagecoach owner, and had lines going into New Hampshire, all through New Hampshire and into Massachusetts. I can remember as a little kid, it was probably 1952. So I was about 8 years old. I rode the train to Concord
Yeah.
with my mother. And we were in a passenger train. There was always the express car ahead of us, right behind the locomotive. And I remember walking up, going into the baggage train. The back half of it was a post office. And here was a guy standing there sorting mail. Hi, how are you? And, you know, and I'm talking with him. The one thing that always stood in my mind, he had a gun on. So, Nathaniel adopted the railroads for using, instead of sending stuff by express, he would send it by express on the railroads. So he became very, very wealthy. She was actually the financial backer of the Woodson brothers. She financed their buying of the boats and all of that. Not many people know that. She also had a cottage on the lake. Do you know what the name of the cottage was? Pine Cliff.
Oh.
So, wait a minute, I'm out of line here. Bear with me. There he is. Who was Edmund Burke? Edmund Burke was a Vermont native who moved to Newport. He served the New Hampshire and U.S. Congress for 3 terms. He also owned the Argus newspaper in Newport. He built a cottage on Lake Sunapee in 1879, and he actually didn't live that long. He died in 1882. The land he owned later became called Brookhaven, and was deeded to his daughter Frances and her husband Colonel George H. Dana, who set up a land company, and he bought additional land, including what's now called Birch Point, and established the summer colony, selling house lots and developing roads in the waterfront. He also commissioned the Edmund Burke in memory of his father-in-law. So that's just a little bit about the steamboats. Anyone have any questions or comments on that? No? No? All right, wait till I get my things together. Yeah. What's the next slide? Oh. Bear with me. Does anyone have anything to say about flying saucers? Anyone experience anything like that?
Is this wreck on the mountain?
Huh?
Is this wreck on the mountain?
When was the first reported sighting of a UFO in the new country? You know that one?
It was back in the 1940s, I hope. No?
Late 1700s, early 1800s on the property line between Brookline, Mass and Boston, which was the Muddy River.
Mm.
If you Google it, experience it, it appeared to come up out of the water.
Wow.
Yeah. That's the first recording for this country.
Well, I stuck this in here because it kind of interests me, and I gotta get my cards in order here. Really? One of the things I did when I had my business, I don't know if all of you knew this, but I used to have a sporting goods store in South Newbury called Dickey's Outdoor Sports. It was originally Dickey's Bait and Tackle. Started when I was 5 years old. I ran it until I retired in 2006 for 56 years. One of the things that we started out selling was bait, live bait. I would go out with my father late at night, picking night crawlers off people's lawns after they'd gone to bed. And golf courses, I did, really. I can tell you all the good lawns in Bradford. So, one of the other things that we had to do was get crayfish. And the state of New Hampshire would often reclaim a pond for trout fishing. And they would only stock it with brook trout or rainbows, and also stock it with crayfish. So, one of the ponds I went to was Rand's Pond in Goshen. And they have a boat launch there. And I would go out with a bucket holding a pail, flashlight, and bucket in one hand, and a fryer scoop in the other hand, and I'd scoop up crayfish. Now I did this, my wife can testify, I did this about 2 or 3 times a week. And I would get between 200 and 300 each night, and bring them back and sell them. So I'm out there one night scooping away, and I hear helicopters coming. Well, that's interesting. So I look up, and there's 2 helicopters coming. I could see the red lights, and they're flying towards me, going from west to east. That's interesting. What are those white lights between them? There was a series of white lights between them, and it all kept coming. And of course, you know what a helicopter sounds like. There's no mistaking what a helicopter sounds like. Well, they got straight overhead, they're coming this way, and those white lights went just like that, gone. And the helicopters kept going very slow. I said, what did I just see? Didn't tell many people about it over the years because you made that up. My deduction from that was, well, those helicopters had to be military. I mean, they weren't small ones, they were big ones. And so they knew this thing was there. And my theory is, no matter what it is, the government knows. They're just not telling. And in the recent news, there's been a lot of talk about unidentified flying objects or whatever. So who knows? Maybe that'll come out in the future. The other one that I have is kind of interesting. This is a KC-135 tanker. They call it the Flying Gas Station. They were stationed in the 80s, early 90s in Pease. And their duty was, if a flight was going from, the Midwest to Europe, they would fly out over the Atlantic, fill this plane up with fuel so it could finish its flight over. They actually did some this recently with Iran.
And you know who drove one of them is our selectman, Sandy Ward.
Yeah, I was gonna get to that.
Oh, sorry.
The interesting thing was, here again, I was told this by Sandy, because I asked her about it, Sandy Ward, our select board member, and she said, oh, I remember that. She said, yeah, it was 1987. I said, okay, 1987. So what happened was, I'm at my counter, and I hear this horrendous noise, this whining, loud noise. What in Earth's name is that? So I ran outside, looked up the road, and around the corner comes a KC-135 about 400 feet off the ground. He leveled off in front of the shop and went this way following the road. Oh my God, he's gonna crash. So I ran in, dialed operator, I said, give me Pease Air Force Base. Pease Air Force Base answered, hello, and I said, I want to speak to the base commander. Well, who's calling? I said, well, you got a plane out here, I think he's in distress.
No.
Thing went quiet. Another voice came, hello. I said, I'm just calling to tell you that you've got one of these KC-135s, I know what they look like. it's flying low, I think he's in trouble, there's black smoke coming out of the engines, because that's what they burn, kerosene. And I said, I just wanted you to know, and his reply was, we have no aircraft in that area. I said, well, I know what I saw. He hung up. So the next day in the Concord Monitor is an article about this pilot who decided that he was going to buzz the commander of the New Hampshire Air National Guard, who happened to live in New London.
I've heard a different version of that, Dick, in that the pilot's mother lived on Sunapee. And I have some pictures with 3 of these things, which is flat out about 400 or 500 feet over Sunapee. And they tilted their wings.
So it may be both.
Yeah, it could well be.
Because the commander did, because what I'm quoting you came out of a newspaper article in the Concord Monitor. And so I said, wow, you know, he wasn't in trouble. So why did he fly low? I pondered.
Probably following the road, dudes, so he knew where he was.
Well, he followed the road for a specific reason. He wanted to know where he was exactly. But why was he flying low?
Get under the radar.
He was under the radar.
Oh my God.
And so what happened is, there's something between New London and Pease Air Force Base. And it's big. It's 2,700 feet tall, Mount Kearsarge. So when he got to Kearsarge, he dropped down, flew around, got on the other side of Kearsarge, came back up. Hey, that's slick. They asked me about it. I said, radar must have lost me because I got behind the mountain. I was over 1,000 feet. I was legal. No, he wasn't. He got caught. Sandra said that well, her comment to me was, he's no longer flying. So that was kind of an interesting little story.
There are those turboprop C-130s. A couple of them buzz the lake almost once a week. I mean, at 400 or 500 feet, they just go straight down the lake.
Well, this guy wasn't supposed to be over land at that height. I mean, this plane was at that height. He blocked out the sky. I mean,
Wow.
somebody else had something.
Well, he just answered my question, because every summer I have these 2 planes that go by and you can hear them coming a mile away. And it's
the other thing we have is the Vermont Air National Guard sends their planes over to Hampshire so they don't disturb the people in Vermont. It's true.
I love it, it's exciting. I was married to a pilot.
So anyway, that's that story. Next one. Okay. Anything peculiar about this picture?
Danny agrees with that.
How many people are there? 8. How many are women? How many are men?
There's no window.
One guy. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 women. Well, I saw in the newspaper, a friend of mine, his family had sold this cottage. It's just north of Lodges.
And that's Newbury.
And they got big coin for it. And I asked him about it, and he said, oh yeah, I said, my old man won that in a poker game back in the 1940s. Really? He said, yeah, it was a whorehouse. What? And I said, how do you know that? He said, there was writing all over the walls in there depicting what was going on. I said, you're kidding me. He said, no, that's true. So, here you are, you come up for a vacation,
Oh, gee.
you take the train, you disembark the train, you go to whatever hotel you want to go to. The wife goes down to meet her friends in the parlor for tea. The guys say, I'm going to Great Island, go bowling. It was a bowling alley on Great Island. Except they take a rowboat and go across the lake. Nobody to the wise. So I don't think many people knew this. But apparently this is what went on there.
So is that on the shore in Blodgett's or on Great Island?
This is in north of Blodgett's. The cottage is still there, you can see it. It's still there. So,
Girls must be retired by now.
what's the next one? Okay. Here is a picture of a locomotive. And it's well, it's not exactly what they ran here. What they ran here was a 440. It had 4 small wheels in front and 4 small wheels in the back. And there it is. Okay? And these are small locomotives. They were 23 ton, which equates out to 46,000 pounds. But to get up to Newbury, they had to run 2 of them. So that wasn't a problem. Well, in 1887, the Boston and Maine bought the Claremont and Concord Railroad. And they said, why do we run 2 trains? Why can't we run 1? Well, all of a sudden, Baldwin Locomotive Works and Amoskeag Mills in Manchester started producing, the next slide,
I think that was
wait a minute, the 460. This was a 50-tonner. It weighed 100,000 pounds.
Wow.
And they started running this instead of 2 of the 440s. They ran 1,460.
What's the 0 mean? If it's 4 wheels and then 6
The 0 means they didn't have any small wheels on the back.
Okay.
The biggest locomotive made is running the country now, Union Pacific, the 4014. This is a 200-ton, 1.2 million pound locomotive. There were 25 of them built in World War II, starting in 1941 to haul ore, coal, steel, and weapons and munitions back and forth across the country for World War II. They only 12 of them, or 8 of them, still exist. The Union Pacific decided to rebuild one of these. It cost them a fortune because nothing, even the technology has been lost. They had to reinvent themselves and build it, and they've been running this thing back and forth around the country. It's an amazing piece of machinery. And they converted it to oil instead of coal. But what happened in Newbury? When I was a youngster, I wanted to go hunting. I was about 13 years old. My father bought me a Winchester 94 30-30 rifle. Wow, that was great. But my father didn't hunt. I couldn't go out alone. So at the age of, I think it was around 14, 15, 16, he hooked me up with another guy that lived on Morse Hill called Arthur Rowe. When I did my talk back a while ago, I showed a picture of one of the schools with the students standing out in front in the 1920s. Well, Arthur Rowe was one of them. Arthur was a very good hunter. He taught me a tremendous amount of woodsmanship and hunting. And so we were out there walking out in back of what's now Southgate on the railroad tracks. and we're going on a section where the tracks cross the swamp. And he said, you know, right underneath here, there's still rail. He said, yeah, he said, the train came up through one night and the rails were gone underwater in the swamp. So all they did was build over it, and they laid new rail right over it. I said, wow, really? Okay. Well, I never really tried to prove anything, but for this talk, I went to the archives of the Boston and Maine Railroad, and I found two things. They did buy Claremont and Concord Railroad in 1887, and in the early 1900s, they started running the 460s, okay? But also, they replaced the rail from Bradford to Newbury. Now the rail is measured by how much it weighs for a 3-foot section. Claremont and Concord was 75-foot rail. Boston, Maine changed it to 85-foot. So that begs the question, why did they change the rail? Well, two reasons. One, probably that heavy locomotive, but my theory is that heavy locomotive pushed the rail when it went through the swamp. For 30 years, those little guys were able to skirt over it. But you put something more than twice the weight, it just pushed the rail down, and so gradually, I think, not overnight, but gradually it got to the point where they were running through water, and they said, we gotta replace that. So they just built it higher and left the rail there and built over it. Kinda unique.
Is this picture where the highway is now, or that's somewhere else?
The highway is on the other side of this. This is gone. The bridge is down there, where you see the last car. This is that little cottage. It's been replaced now. It was right, my grandfather sold that to a gentleman by the name of Eddie Kamascott. And just a little bit of family history. Wright Hill, I don't know if you know that. That was my family farm. They own land in Sutton, Newbury, and Bradford. And my great-grandfather, Frank, died in 1947. My grandfather, his brother, and sister got the land, and they sold it for peanuts. My grandfather owned all the eastern shore of Lake Todd. He sold it off in lots for $50, $35. That little like island, you get the little mill pond there, he sold that for $75. But land was a liability. And it gets even worse. Before he sold any of it, he said to my father, do you want it? What the hell do I want that for? That was my father's exact words. What the hell do I want that for?
What year was that?
It was 48, 49.
So there was no economy at all up
There was no incentive. I mean, back to a previous story, a guy won a cottage on Lake Sunapee in a poker game. It didn't really have that much value. So that's my theory on the disappearing railroad tracks. Okay, so now we come to the U.S. Constitution. The date on this is September 17th, 1787. So here's the history of this. The first draft was received by printers Dunlap and Claypool of Philadelphia as a 7-page broadside rendition of the Constitution on August 4th, 1787. In early September, a new draft was presented and printed on September 12th, 1787. On September 15th, 3 days later, the convention ordered the printing of 500 copies to be dated September 17th, 1787. The convention then sent copies to the states, at that time they were colonies, for ratification on September 28th and ordered another 200 copies to be printed. I believe Newbury may have one of those 200 copies. Some authorities say, oh, no, there was 400 printed. Nobody really knows. The one fact we do know is there are very few left. Very few left. Was this actually printed in September 17th? Or did he just copy the printing of? But it is, in fact, in that time period, and very, very rare. In 2004, a copy of the official edition endorsed by Congress appeared at Brunk Auctions and sold for $9 million. This printing was by McLean of New York on behalf of Dunlop and Claypool. And that one was printed on September 28, 1787. This one, if the date is correct, was right after they printed it. So, who knows? Somebody said, well, why don't we get it, have somebody estimate it, an assessor, and have them put a value on it? And my reply was, no, we don't want to put a value on it because it's too valuable to put a value on. Plus, you know, everybody in town, let's sell the damn thing. Pay our taxes. So, who knows? The history of how it got found was interesting in that in around 1996, I think, is that?
1990.
1990?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was, because what happened is the school district deeded the the school here to the town, and they moved the town office up here. They gave the job to the Historical Society to go through all of the artifacts, articles, and things in the old selectman office in South Newbury, and save and discard what was to be saved and what was to be discarded. The president of the Historical Society at the time was Mike Monroe, who used to live in the house where the Fowler brothers lived. He asked Tracy Messer, what do we do with this? And they said, oh wow, this has got to be important. So it turned out that it was important, and there was a big celebration. The town turned it over to the New Hampshire Historical Society, and for safekeeping, reserving the right to ask for it back at any given time. So I was oblivious to all of this. I was, at the time, I think I was on the fire department, I was on the school board. I was not that involved in town government at the time, so I didn't know any of that. So when I was selectman, I got a clue. Somebody said, you know, we had an original copy of the US Constitution. I said, really? Was it original? Well, we don't know. I said, well, we ought to get that back and hang it up somewhere where people can look at it. So I envisioned, you know, a 2 foot by 3 foot, all in one sheet of paper Constitution copy. So years passed. I wasn't selectman for a while, a long while. Back a couple of years ago, I said, did we ever get that copy back? Oh yeah, it's in the town vault in the office. So I went into town and I asked Pam, I said, do we have that copy? Oh yeah, I'll get it for you. So she comes out, it's in a plastic sleeve. I looked at it, I said, oh my God, it's the real thing. I said, I'm not even opening this. I said, we gotta do something with this. The library then said, we need to conserve it, we need to protect it, and maybe perhaps give it back to the New Hampshire archives to keep it in good standing with the proviso that if we wanted it back, we could ask for it. So it's been down in, where, Andover, Mass?
Andover, yeah.
It's been down in Andover, it's being created, what we have is, 16 pages. And, it's a broadside printing, in other words, one side only. And it's about that wide and about that tall. That's a picture of it. And so the library, with some donated funds, had it conserved. It's gonna have its own little box, preserve it. And copies of it are being made that will hang somewhere in the library, and for people to look at. It's too valuable a document for us to put our greasy fingers on and then say, I wonder where that went.
Was there a value put on it?
No. As I said, one of the members of the Historical Society said, well, I can get it appraised. And I said, I'd rather not, because once you put a definite appraisal on, and I said, the other thing is, if this thing comes out to, maybe it's worth $100,000, maybe it's worth $20,000, maybe it's worth the $9 million. I said, but you have somebody appraise it. Once he says, oh, this thing's worth $9 million, I want $10,000 for the appraisal.
Say nothing to the insurance.
Yeah, and so, it's a great thing to happen to the town of Newbury. The question is, how did we end up with it? I think there's some connection between Governor John Wentworth and his brother-in-law, John Fisher. There's a connection there somehow, that this thing somehow got not only presented but preserved. Supposedly every town in New Hampshire got a copy of the Constitution. There's only one other that is known to exist.
So the Constitution, as I know it, that one sheet of paper, is it word for word for what this is?
This is, yep. It's just a booklet, so it's printed as a booklet, yep.
So, it's pretty amazing. It's an amazing document. I just felt that the way things are going in this country, the divisiveness, and me versus you, them versus us, this document clearly defined what we were. We're not a democracy. I don't want to get political, but the word democracy never occurs in the US Constitution. The word republic, which means you and I have control of it, not those people sitting in Congress. And we need to remember that. We need to start working together more than what we are, what we're doing.
John Adams.
I'll get off my pulpit on that.
John Adams feared the two-party system. He kind of predicted that from day one with Washington, it started.
Yeah.
The Republic went out the window, kind of.
Dan?
They have finished conserving that. Leah has done a great job in raising funds to have it all conserved. And next Monday night, the selectmen will be voting to loan it to the New Hampshire State Archives. It will remain the property of the town of Newbury, but we will have a copy of the whole Constitution that will be displayed. Leah, have you figured out where
It will be
it's?
displayed, yeah. Yeah, and Dick and I have, I think, discussed before where we think it might go, but yeah, so.
It's an amazing piece of history. It really is. And it's us. We have that. So,
after it being in the vault without proper humidification and everything else, it's gonna get a great home in the state archives.
Yeah, yeah. Then we still have the option of checking it out if we want to for a special day in Newbury, so it's really opportunity to preserve it for future generations.
And I was gonna say, early discussion, we weren't sure what we were gonna do, whether we were gonna display this in the library or not, and then we were just worried about how to keep it safe in the library, you know, with so many people moving in and out, and then it was decided we'd do the
And
copies.
In discussion with the New England Document Conservation Center, it was found out that displaying paper, of this
Right.
age would really degrade it over time, and so,
Yeah.
really the only option is to store it.
Store it.
It'll be stored, but we will have a
We will have a-
photographic
We'll have a full
copy.
copy.
An absolute, copy of it, so.
which
I
would
mean,
be
they,
nice.
you know, they did conservatory work, fixing the edges and binding it and making it so it'll last, but the other factor is not only the security and insurance on it, but a safe environment,
Exactly.
temperature and moisture control and all of that. I mean, it's amazing, it lasted so much sitting in that little vault down in South Newbury all those years. I mean, it was tucked in a whole bunch of papers, and that's probably what saved it. It didn't get light and anything to affect it. So anyway, that's my piece
And
on
thank
it.
you, Dick, for bringing that to the town's attention, really.
I also wanna thank Leah for helping me with all
Yeah.
these slides and.
Well, I think you're.
What about the chicken
One more.
farm?
Chicken
That's what I came for.
I gotta do the hook one, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, Chicken Farmer Rock. Nobody really knows when this actually occurred. It appeared at one point. The history of it is that a Newbury resident who lived on Red House Road complained to the state, didn't like graffiti, and so the state obligingly came up and painted it over. And then all of a sudden, a few days later, it didn't say Chicken Farmer, I love you. It said Chicken Farmer, I still love you. And so the legend has gone on. Many people have come up with stories and articles. There have been articles in Yankee Magazine. I think there was one in Reader's Digest, all explaining they know the answer. And they don't. So I got blamed for knowing the secret because in the controversy of this, once the sign came back, the select board, what's the next?
And I think I only have.
The select board issued a petition, Town of Newbury, by the Board of Selectmen, a petition for status quo to the state of New Hampshire Department of Transportation. Leave it alone. And so they have. Now, over the years, it's been doctored and changed, and I don't know who's doing all that. But when this occurred, I said to Dennis, Dennis was our town administrator, I said, Dennis, nobody's got a clue as to what really happened. Well, how do you know that? I said, I know the story. Well, how do you know? I can't say. And I said, I'm sworn to secrecy, but at this point, nobody knows what really happened. And all the stories out there are not correct. So, reporter from NPR came to Dennis, and Dennis, oh, I don't know, but if you go down and see Dick Wright down there, he'll tell you all about it. So in marches the NPR reporter, and you know, let me tell you this, I said, it's better left unsaid because the mystery continues, the mystique. Everybody can imagine in their own mind what the true story is. But the minute I tell what the true story is, people will say, is that all it was?
So, who owns the land where that rock is?
The state of New Hampshire.
So why, if it's supposed to be chicken farmer, I still love you, why have we allowed that black thing to be there that just says, I love you?
Well, like I say, people, the original person, people, entity that did it, is one person. All of these other things that, or one entity, I should say, all of these others have been other people. I don't know who those people are. I just know the origin.
I, for one, would like it to go back to, I still love you.
Yeah, well, you know, somebody will probably say, I'm gonna change that, and it'll probably change.
Yeah, if they change
But-
it, it's like me, don't.
Right, yeah.
What year did it appear?
Huh?
What year did it appear?
I wanna say in the 1980s, I really don't know,
Earlier.
I never asked that question.
Earlier. At least 70s,
Hmm?
at least
Stayed in the
70s.
70s.
It was there in the 70s.
Was it?
I'll go back to,
It's been there a long
Yeah.
time.
when my folks used to drive up from Boston, if my father got through Bradford without getting stopped, he'd say, we're home, when he saw that sign.
Yeah,
When was
people,
that down?
That was in the
I used to have
mid-sixties,
people
late
stop in the shop and say, you know, when we would come up to Newbury with the kids, they'd look for your shop because they knew the lake wasn't far beyond. And they'd all be in the back seats, yeah, Dickies, we're almost there. So,
Do you know if the original said, I still love you?
the original was I love you.
I
love
love
you.
I love you.
Yeah.
I love it.
Dickie, question, how, are you able to reveal how you came to know? the
No.
truth?
It's a convoluted way on how I found out, and it would involve other people than the originals, perpetrators, and I don't wanna go there.
Will the information ever come out publicly, do you believe?
No.
I think someday, my own personal feeling is that the entities that did this are fear of some kind of retribution. Oh, you shouldn't have done that, you're gonna get fined so much or whatever. So, I think their fear is that. They do have a copy of that though.
I bought a plaque over at the trading post, and it's a wood engraving of the chicken farmer rock, and I painted it red and white and everything, and I wanted to get the story of the saying, so I got online and I did ChatGPT, and Dick Wright's name is all over it.
The NPR reporter,
They had the NPR reporters.
but it did not mention my name. He came and he said, in honor of his request, I will not divulge his name.
Check it out.
There's probably a half a dozen very interesting stories on YouTube and so forth about chicken farmer rock. It's better left unsaid, because like I said, the minute you find out,
It's not worth it.
So this isn't you.
huh?
So the chicken farmer isn't you.
It isn't me. No.
There's a local potter that's making mugs, and you can get one
Right.
that says, I love, chicken farmer, I love you, and chicken farmer, I still love you, so you can have them
Is it
both.
artisans, favorite artisans?
Was this petition sent to the DOT,
Yes,
and did they ever respond?
yes, they have not touched it.
I know they
since.
haven't touched it, but they never officially said anything.
I don't know, I never asked for if they had a response, I just got a copy of this from the office. Any other questions?
Getting back to the boats on the lake, my grandfather dug up a boat, engine that was on the shore, and it had been buried for 40 years. This was back in 1968, and he asked the town fathers in Newbury if he could have it, if he could find it and dig it up. He found it, he dug it up, took it home, took it all apart, it was all brass, took it all apart, cleaned it all up, got it fixed, took it to Hinsdale, when they used to have the steam engine thing in August, took it over there and got it running.
What was his name?
Orison Woodard.
Ozzie Woodard, yes. I went up and saw Ozzie with that engine before he did that.
Yep.
And talked with him. He had rebuilt that thing. It was pretty
And it's
amazing. He
in-
lived in Sutton Mills.
It's in the Sutton, Sunapee Museum,
It's in the Historical Society in
Yeah.
Sunapee.
and
But I
there's
went and-
also a horseless carriage there.
Yeah,
that he
I
had,
went
too.
and talked to him about it.
Yep.
It was, I mean, he meticulously restored that.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I bet I know who that you're talking about.
He did it in
Ozzie
in the
Woodard.
basement of his house.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was pretty neat. Any others?
Yeah.
I have a quick little, something to share on, Lake Todd, floating islands. To this day, there are still little floating islands out there in the fall, and so if you're, you know.
Not
seeing-
every year though.
Huh?
Not every year.
Yeah, right, it skips now and then.
Depends on the temperature.
They have to build up enough gas to come up, and they're getting less and less frequent.
And I did some poking with my oar and I couldn't get it to go down. but A lot of people, you see them in the boats and water skiing, and all of a sudden they make a quick turn, they saw it.
Well, this Arthur Rowe that I referenced, that I went hunting with, he said he used to go horn pouting, and he'd go on the island and fish off the edge, and because the island had lifted up and you got all this muck and stuff under there, the horn pout would get attracted to that, and he'd catch horn pout like crazy doing that.
Thank you, Vicki.
Thank you very much.